CBS affiliate, and had a job, and I worked there for 17 months. And during that period, one of my largest accounts, an automobile company, a used car dealer, who was spending at that time $250,000, $500,000 a year, which at that time was a big budget for automobiles, said to me one day, "Kid, how come I don't get to advertise on the other TV stations like I used to?" And I said, "Mr. Abels, it's just because I'm a good salesman, and your ad agency has been buying all of the time from me because I've been making better reasons for it. And whether you know it or not, I've been writing all of their commercials for them because, as you know, Harold, I'm a writer." And he said, "Well, if you could sell cars as well as you could sell advertising, I could get rich." I said, "Mr. Abel, trust me, I can sell cars as well as I can sell advertising." So he said, "Okay, you can be my ad agency." So at that time, this is the early 60s, I'm making $25,000, $30,000 a year, something like that, okay? And it didn't take long for me to get my Olivetti adding machine and figure out that 15% of $500,000 was $75,000. I ran home and told my wife, "I'm in the ad agency business." And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm in the ad agency business because I'm going to do Abel's." So I called my boss, and my boss said, "Joe, you can't because you have to have 3 accounts." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "To be an ad agency, you have to have 3 accounts." So I said to my boss, "Okay." And I called up 2 of the accounts that I had as a TV time salesman. And I said, one of which was Arab Termite Pest Control. "But I want to be your ad agency. Is that okay with you?" I was writing all the commercials anyway. They said, "Okay." So I said, "Boss, here's my notice. I'm in the ad agency business." So I immediately went out and I rented a room above a wallpaper store. Okay. And I had one little office by myself, an old typewriter, and, just could type. And so I said, "I'm going to go out and get myself accounts." Well, while the 17 months I was as a time salesman, I was writing all the commercials for most of the other salesmen at the station. So
Wow.
it was not hard for me to begin to get accounts. So I'm not long after I'm there, 63, 64, I'm not even sure. I get an opportunity to get McDonald's, which not many people had heard too much about McDonald's, but they were a growing company that Ray Kroc did. And I was going to make a presentation to do McDonald's. And into my office on the second floor of the wallpaper company comes this man in a white suit. And he says to me, "Kid, I heard about you. I want to start opening up Kentucky Fried Chicken stores. And I want to change the Fiesta restaurant and this restaurant that was selling Original Recipe into KFC freestanding full stores. And that I have a restaurant in Anderson, Indiana, and a restaurant in Fort Wayne, Indiana, that are selling the product, but they're cafeterias or full service restaurants." I said, "Bingo, let's do it." So I took Kentucky Fried Chicken instead of McDonald's and grew with KFC from that point on. And it grew and grew and grew. And I became a very large KFC agency handling the multi-states advertising until they got big enough to get the J. Walter Thompsons or Leo Burnett's, I think, or I don't know, Young and Rubicam. I'm not sure what the big agencies were. And they began to see me as sort of the threat and did everything they could to undermine me. But the only person that was in the advertising business that Colonel Sanders would speak with was me, until John Way Brown, who ended up being the governor of Kentucky, purchased KFC from the Colonel. And so I handled the Colonel from 63 to 83 and handled hundreds of stores advertising. And I developed a philosophy that advertising doesn't sell chicken. Good chicken sells chicken. And I made my stores that I represented better at what they did, which was quality, service, value, and cleanliness. And I put the greatest emphasis on the physical operations of the stores, and their businesses succeeded because of the way they operated their stores, not because of the advertising. And KFC was perplexed because my stores were always the highest volume stores, and they thought there's something he's doing with the advertising that's making his stores better, not that my chicken was hotter and my sales training of my counter help. I mean, you realize that McDonald's and Arby's and Burger King are dependent upon 16-year-old kids making their stores successful. And what happens at that counter when those kids got their belly to the counter are the future of the store. And what these at that time $4, $5, $6, $7 an hour employees in the back that were making the chicken or making hamburgers or making roast beef sandwiches, that the whole business was dependent upon those people. And subsequently, they became the most important people within the operations. And so as I developed my ad agency, which was pretty big and representing so many companies, I always had the philosophy, I'm going to make my companies that I represent better at what they do than their competition. And it doesn't matter what the advertising is, they will be successful. That's how I developed Newman Advertising, and it grew. At the end of 20 years, I decided that there was not anything more I could do with it. And we had hit the Jimmy Carter era where interest rates were going up, and I was dependent upon furniture and automobiles and mobile homes and home builders, and interest rates went to 20%. And I said, I don't want to do this anymore, and retired in 1983. That's
Okay.
early
Well,
start.
I mean, living in Indianapolis, I mean, which is the home of the motorsports world. I know that you had a interest in that particular environment. So I want to go and talk a little bit about you and your run and what you did in the motorsports world and owning a company that had something to do with that.
Okay, well, I obviously was around. I was the ad agency for the Indiana Pacers and the old ABA and the new ABA, the Indianapolis Indians, uh, the Indianapolis Checkers at that time, that were succeeded by the Indianapolis Ice. And so I was handling the advertising of much of the professional sports in Indianapolis. And I was deeply involved with several sponsors that were involved with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Subsequently, many, many years later, my son Denny became the food and beverage manager of the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for 14 years. But going way back then, um, I liked the idea of getting more involved in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway than being a participant. So I ended up getting a car that had to be the slowest car. I got to tell you, my car was the slowest car ever. I used to run alongside the car and say, "Can't you run faster?" But I had a car that was in it, and I put Colonel Sanders in as the sponsor of the car. And because I was in the ad agency business, I still say I had the prettiest car that has ever not been in the Indianapolis 500. But what it gave me was gasoline alley passes and badges and access, and subsequently being in the ad agency business, to be able to get penthouses and to be able to get tickets and to be able to be on the inside and get to meet all of the drivers. And at that time, all of the drivers, um, were famous, and I got a chance to meet them, and it was fun. But I was not a successful quote owner. However, I ultimately invested in a company called Dymag, which was a European company that made magnesium wheels. And these wheels, a lot of people don't realize it, but most of the wheels that are done by Fittipaldi and other manufacturers are steel. Mine were magnesium and was light enough to lift up on your finger. And subsequently, my wheels were faster and took a second off a race car's track. So AJ Foyt and all of the others in green racing and so forth were started buying my wheels. We got the U.S. rights to them, and the Dimag wheels would in the race in 1996 with our wheels on them. We were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7. We won the Indianapolis 500, and the six top finishers were on my Dimag wheels. However, an accident in a succeeding year forced them, because of an accident, to drill another hole in it, a pressure sensitive device that was transmitted to the cockpit to let them know if they were losing air. And I lost my dynamic superiority, or whatever you would call it, and my speed, because they drilled a second hole and it slowed us down, and I got out of the wheel business. But for that long period of time, I really had a wonderful association with so many of the drivers and so many of the owners, and it was fun. I can't say it was profitable particularly, or it was for the ad agency during the 80s, but I enjoyed it. Not, and I raised my kids who were around it, which is ultimately in relation to KFC, how Denny ended up at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway as food and beverage manager for many years. That's a
Wow,
thumbnail.
great story. Okay, so now that leads me to, you mentioned earlier about the Indiana Pacers. So that was the original Indiana Pacers. I want you to talk and walk us through that story on how you got involved in that process and where it led up to today of what you've been involved in for the past 20 plus years with the American Basketball Association as it is now.
That's easy enough to do. As I said, I was the ad agency for the Indiana Pacers in the old ABA and in the new ABA, and when they went into the NBA. And the old ABA had Hall of Famer George McGinnis, and it had Billy Keller and Rick Mount and Bob Nedelicki and one of the great players of all times, Roger Brown. So I was the ad agency for them, and did their commercials and ticket sales and marketing and so forth. Well, they merged in the early 70s with the NBA, and four teams went into the NBA: the Pacers, the Nets, the Nuggets, and the Spurs. The Spurs had George Gervin was on the Spurs, and so the ABA merged, and they ultimately, I think it was 73, discontinued. I knew the co-owner of the Indiana Pacers and one of the original co-founders of the ABA. I knew him because he was an attorney one floor down from where my offices were downtown, and I hadn't seen him. And in 1999, I happened to be standing at a counter at a McDonald's at 96th and Meridian, and Dick was standing next to me, and I hadn't seen him probably in 17 years, even though he lived 4 or 5 blocks from me. Now,
wow.
Subsequently, I had bought 16 radio stations operating in Florida, Michigan, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Indiana. So I operated them under Alliance Broadcasting Company, and I was CEO. We were a publicly traded company. And I operated them for a few years, and I didn't like the direction that radio was going. So I got out of the radio business, and I really retired for the second time. And we're standing at the McDonald's, and Dick said, "Do you want to bring back the ABA?" And I said, "Yeah, I would do it, but if I'm going to get involved with it, there's something that bothers me, and that is that unless you're a Michael Jordan or an Usher or a Jay-Z or a you can't own, or Bob Johnson, you can't have a part of a team, or Magic Johnson, but what you can have is a small part because they use them as a token because most of their players are black. If I bring back the ABA and rebuild the league, number one, I'm going to build it into the largest professional sports league ever. That's the only way I'm going to come back. And number two, I'm going to make it the most diversified professional sports league in history. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to make it easier to own and operate an ABA team than any other sports team in professional sports. And number four, whoops, you can still hear me. And number four, I'm going to teach these owners how to operate. I'm going to build them a marketing business plan that makes even inexperienced people. They are very strong on basketball. They know basketball. They love basketball. They have a passion for basketball, but none or very few really know how to make money doing it. And I will tell you, I know that for a fact because I'm going to apply the same principles I did with all the black businesses that I was handling in Indianapolis. I was a good writer and had good commercials, but I will tell you, if you were going to be a part of Joe Newman advertising, you were going to run a good business. You were not going to be sloppy. And if you are sloppy and don't do the things you need to do, you're going to be out of business. So all of a sudden, not only was I representing a lot of black businesses, but these businesses were so successful, and I didn't want them to be black businesses. I wanted them to be black-owned businesses, but I wanted them to be competitive in the general market. I wanted them to market their businesses because of the products and services they sold and the way they did business. They could build their business and not depend on the 15% black community, but be able to get people to come into their businesses because they were good. And so I did not limit myself to WTLC or black media or the Recorder newspaper. I went after the 85% general market business for my black-owned businesses, and boy, they were successful. And so with the ABA, we have become the largest professional sports league in history, but we also are 75% owned by African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, and women. I have over 30 women owners, and there's never been diversification and inclusion like our league. And then I said, the first year when I did it, the market reservation fee or franchise fee, if you want to call it that, was $75,000. Now, traditionally, as the league builds, they increase it. So if you are looking for a soccer team or an indoor football team or any other league, they, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. I systematically brought the initial year, 2000, at $75,000. I brought it down to $2,500, 2500, to own an ABA basketball team. Deliberately, because I didn't want any of these black owners or Hispanic owners or Asian owners. I did not want them to dig a hole that they couldn't get out of. I didn't want them to jeopardize their families. I didn't want them to jeopardize their future because they were so much in debt that they got to hate what they loved. And so I've made it easier to own an ABA team. And today, Harold, when you originally came in 10, 12 years ago, I had gotten it down to $10,000. When I told my wife I'm dropping it to 5, she said, "You got to be kidding. You can get 10 times that." And I said, "I know I could, but I'm not, because I'm on a roll right now, and now I have the diversification I need." And you know what? One of the things that always bothered me was I have these 90% of my players are black. I mean, that's the reality of it. And they started lacing on shoes and their sneakers when they're 6 years old, and they played grade school ball and middle.
Sweet.